In update 2.72, Ankama made changes to the stats of almost every legendary item, so I thought I should probably remage my items before the update to optimize the end result, because as you can see, I have a lot of legendaries. In short, here's how the item migration works. As long as the line on the item is not affected by the changes, it'll stay the same after the update. So what does it mean for a line to be affected by the changes? Basically, if you're looking at the new item and you notice that a line was removed from the item completely, or there was a change in the possible values for the line, meaning the min and max values are different, or the new line that's being added already exists but as an exo on your previous item. Now there's also another rule for items that were applied a Transcendence rune. All the items that are affected by the changes and that you couldn't mage anymore now become mageable again, but you lose the trans rune you applied if it was an exo. So essentially, the trick for getting good items from the migration without too much effort is to apply trans runes to existing lines on the item. Let's take a look at what I did to my items before the update and what the end result was after the update. Okay, so for the Jhessica belt, in theory, they're increasing the vitality from 450 to 500. They're adding a new agility line, which is 81 to 100 agility, and that line is going to be based on the previous line of chance. The pushback res stays the same, and the melee res stays the same. They're also adding a spell damage line, which is based on the melee resistance. So here, because on my belt, I literally have perfect chance and perfect melee resistance, I knew I was going to get perfect agility and perfect spell damage. And because I have very good vitality, 449 out of 450, I figured that's probably going to give me 500 vitality after the update. So the only thing that needs fixing is pushback resistance. Now this is already a very good mage. I don't care enough about pushback resistance to remage my whole item. So what I did here was just apply a trance rune to get my pushback resistance from 13 to 22. And since I know that I'm going to be able to mage my item again after the update, this is just a guaranteed buff to my pushback resistance without sacrificing any other line on my item. Okay, now let's look at what happened to my Jhessica belt. Okay, so the vitality did not get to 500. We're at 498. Makes sense if you do the proportions. I have 100 chance, 100 agility, 2% spell damage, 10% melee res, like I expected. And I also have 22 pushback resistance, exactly the same value that I left off with the trance rune. As you can see, I can now mage this item again, and I'm very satisfied with this. You might also have noticed that the minus range damage percentage is gone, so now this belt can be played at a distance, except you won't be able to use the passive, but it's still a great belt. For me as a Feka, I mostly use this belt in melee with my Omni set, where I spam a lot of glyphs, and so the minus range damage line being gone means that I'm gonna deal more damage to enemies that are not specifically next to me, but that are inside my glyphs. Okay, next up we have the Rykke Errel cape. For this cape, the vitality stays the same thing for intelligence and strength. We get a new initiative line and 3 new resistance lines, strength, fire, and neutral. And all these 4 new lines are linked to vitality, meaning if you have perfect vitality, you're gonna have perfect initiative, strength res, fire res, and neutral res. The lock goes down from 20 to 15, and the MP parry stays the same at 20 max. And so I have 2 of these capes. One of them is overmaged with crit res, so I was actually not sure at all what would happen with this, so I just decided to leave it untouched, especially because since I have 2 capes, I don't need to have them maged in the same way. So I was just curious what would happen to this one, which has 0 crit resistance. And now for the other cape, I really wanted to get that perfect 500 vitality so that I could have perfect 400 initiative, 7% strength res, 7% fire res, and 7% neutral res. And then for the strength and intelligence, ideally I want them to be at max as well. So I just tried to get the best stats there, while at the same time, I knew I didn't have to max the lock completely. And so I got the vit and the characteristics to acceptable values. And then I applied a trance lock rune so that I can go from 15 to 19 pretty easily, knowing that they'd allow me to mage the item again after the update. The MP parry, I don't care that much, so I left it at 16 there, and I think that's overall acceptable stats. I'm really liking this cape. It looks like it's going to be a really good item after the update. With the additional resistance lines being added, you could use this a lot more in PvP, and especially the initiative as well. When you think about it, if you have max stats, this cape alone gives you 600 initiative because of the intelligence and the strength, and it also has a pretty cool passive for a melee class. So now after the update, for my Rykke Errel cape, which had the crit res overmage, The Overmage stayed, so I still have 0 crit res. I already had no lock and no MP parry, so that stayed the same. My vitality also stayed the same, that's normal. But surprisingly, the stats went up. So I had below the minimal value of 71, and now because the values changed and the minimum is now 81, they brought it back to 81. So this is just an overall buff. I basically gained around 50 stats without doing anything, which is really cool. Now for my other cape, I already had perfect vit, so that stayed the same. Having the perfect vitality gave me perfect initiative as well at 400 and perfect resistances at 7% each. My lock was at 19 and that got changed to 14 lock out of 15. My intelligence got changed from 99 to 100 and my strength got changed from 93 to 96. And then the MP parry stayed the same. Overall, to be honest, this item looks insane. I can mage it again as well, even though I applied the trance rune before. I'm really happy with this. Next we have War's Halbaxe. So this item is very interesting because it's kind of super easy to get perfect stats, and the reason for this is because the fire damage line is being removed completely. So you can use that whole line just for sync, and that's exactly what I did. So the vitality, the intelligence, the lock, the fire resistance, and the MP reduction all stay the same. We're getting 2 new lines on the item, which are 500 initiative and 5% crit. The initiative is based on the previous vitality, and the 5% crit is based on the fire res. So if you want max initiative and max crits, then you want perfect vitality and you want perfect fire res. So using fire damage as sync, I maged both of my war axes the same way. And again, I used that trick to get some easy maging. I applied a trance rune for lock on one of the axes when it was at 15 lock, so that I could increase it to 19 lock and just move on to another item. And then surprisingly, I was able to get really perfect stats on one of the axes, leaving the fire damage at 16, which we don't care about, and even having an overmage of 31 vitality. So I knew this item was going to be literally perfect after the update. So now the end result of the first axe, I left it at 445 vit, that stayed the same. But since vitality is the reference for initiative, I didn't get the full 500 initiative, but 490 is still okay, it's acceptable. I did have the max fire resistance, which gave me max crit percent. MP reduction was already at max. I was able to get the 19 lock with a trance rune, and now I'm still at 19 lock, but the trance rune is gone, so I can mage this item again. And the intelligence did not move. So it's not a super good item. I don't like that I only have 114 intelligence out of 120, but it's okay. It's usable, it's fine. What I'm really pumped about is my other axe. For this axe, I literally had every line perfect with extra vitality, and although I only had 16 fire damage out of 20, that line just went away completely, so I don't have to worry about it after the update. And so now I have a perfect War's Halbaxe with an overmage of 31 vitality. Next up we have Corruption Cape. So I had 2 of these Corruption Capes and I was really running out of time because I was literally maging right before the maintenance. So my items are not going to be looking good, but I'm still going to explain what I was looking for. So the vitality is just lowered. Instead of being 401 to 450, it's now 351 to 400. We got new resistance lines, 5% in strength, water, air, and neutral, and those lines are based on the value of the melee resistance. Next up we have a new summon line, which gives 2 summons, and this is based on the melee resistance as well. We've got a new lock line at 20 lock, a new air damage, and a new agility line, which are based on water damage and chance. So the idea here for me was just getting the best stats I could on every line. I didn't really care too much about MP parry, although that was going to give me lock, which is good for playing melee. So I didn't really have any stats that I wanted to sacrifice. I knew I had to have perfect melee resistance because that's going to affect so many lines on the new item. So I just did my best, considering I also didn't have any time left for maging. Also, there wasn't any line that could take a trance rune really, so this was just really a hard item to mage. It might actually become better and easier to mage after the update because we're getting a summons line which we can use as sync. So looking at my corruption capes after the update, this one I kind of didn't really have any time to mage it, so it's a bit understandable that the vitality is really bad. But the stats are actually not that bad, 70, 67, and 67. It's not looking great, but it's acceptable for an unmaged cape. Same thing for the damages really, 19, 19, 18. And then 17 lock, 5% everywhere, and 2 summons. This cape I really didn't have time to mage, but now the other cape should look better. So I left the vitality at 447 out of 450 Now I got 397 out of 400, which is 3 off the max value. I had 79 strength and 80 chance, and now I have 70 in all 3 elements. Because I had 14 MP parry out of 15, I did get 19 lock out of 20, which is great. And then the sad part, because my water damage was really low, same thing for my earth damage, they stayed the same at 16 and 17. And then the new line of air damage is also at 16 because it was based on the water damage line. So the damage lines are not great. Apart from that, everything looks fine. For Buhorado, there's a new crit percent line which is being added, and that's based off the MP. And there's a new air resistance line at 10%, which is based off the range. So as long as you have an MP and you have a range, you'll get 10% crit and 10% air res. The pushback damage and the agility stay the same. The issue with my Buhorado is that it had 2% air res as in the exo, and because the new item is getting air res anyways, I knew the exo was gonna go away. So what I did is try to use that 2% air res as sync to try to get another type of resistance on the item. I did want to increase pushback damage, but I felt like 12 sync was not enough to do this, and I didn't want to remage the whole item because I was running out of time. So I just tried to apply fire res right away, and unfortunately it failed, so I just stopped there and moved on to another item. If we look in version 2.72, the item is literally the same as before. I have max crits and max air res because I had an MP in a range. The VIT is the same, the agility is the same, and the pushback damage is also the same. Unfortunately, it's stuck at 18, but there's nothing I can do about it really. You can't apply a transfer rune on 18. Death-Defying is actually an interesting item. For this one, we get the new initiative line at 300 initiative, and this line is based on vitality. The vitality does also change from 200 to 250. The crit res stays the same, and the resistances are increased from 8 to 10%. Now the reason this item is really easy to mage is because the melee resistance is literally being removed from the item, so you can just use that as sync, make all the other lines perfect, and you don't even need to go to 200 vitality normally. You can just stay at 100 vitality and then apply a 100 trance rune, which is exactly what I did because I know I'm going to be able to mage the item again after the update. Now looking at the item after the update, I was right, I literally have a perfect item. 300 initiative, 250 vit, 30 crit res, 10% in both resistances. I have 2 of these, they were really badly maged, both of them. And here when I was maging them, I was literally at the end of the maintenance. I think I only had 1 minute left for the last one, so I completely rushed it. I just brought the stats up the most that I could before the maintenance started. But looking at what happened to the item, the vitality is still the same thing for strength and intelligence. We get a new chance line, which is based on intelligence. We also get a new distance resistance line, which is based on the weapon damage line. And finally, we get a new MP parry line, which is based on air damage. So ideally, if you wanted good stats for this, you would get good intelligence, perfect weapon damage, and perfect air damage. Looking at my items after the update, the vitality is looking good. The damage is just 1 off the max. I do have 10% weapon damage. The stats are fine, they're not too far from 80. I also have 10% range res. And then for the other hat, it's looking a bit better to be honest. Some damages are at 10 and the MP parry is higher. So overall this is looking good. I could still mage it a little bit, increase the fixed damage at the expense of MP parry maybe. But yeah, considering I had really no time to mage this, I'm pretty satisfied with the outcome. We now get to Dodge's Audacity. So for this item, there's 5 new lines. We get 7% air, water, and fire res, and we get 7% crit, all of which are linked to vitality, and then we get 80 chance, which is linked to agility. For my item, I wanted to get as much vitality as possible, because that's really going to dictate the res and the crit. I didn't go to 400 exactly, because I think in their formula, if you have above like a certain number, you're still going to get the max res. So I think 395 was within the safe zone. Then I knew that the new chance line was going to be linked to agility, so I tried to get as much agility as possible, so I left it there at 79. MP parry I didn't care too much about, and 40 pushback damage, I really wanted this. There's the intelligence line, which I left at 73. Really, I was satisfied with VIT, agility, and pushback damage, so I just left it there. So let's see what it looks like after the update. Okay, so the VIT is still the same at 395. We now have 79 chance, 79 agility, 73 intelligence, 40 pushback damage, 15 MP parry, and 7% crit and resistances. Honestly, the item is not bad. It's looking like it's usable. The passive is a little weird, but it could be really good with a Buhorado, especially because this gives 20% crit as a passive, which is really a lot. And same thing goes for 80 pushback damage. Okay, now I'm gonna group up a lot of items together because either I couldn't mage them or I didn't want to touch them because it had like an AP exo, for example. So we're just gonna see what it was before the update and what it became after the update. First we have Ganymede. I had 3 of these crowns and they all had an exo, either spell damage or range damage. The thing with this hat is that we're now getting 2% res in every element based on the AP being there. And we're also getting 70 wisdom based on the dodge. All the other stats stay the same, so let's compare them. So for the first one, it was looking already pretty perfect. I'm only missing 1 vitality, and then after the update, it's literally the same thing, so you really can't get better than this. This is almost a perfect item. The next one, 343 vitality, 114 power, 3 dodge. It's really awful to be honest. It does have a spell damage exo. If we look after the update, the spell damage is still there. The vitality and power is the same. The dodge is still awful, and we get 51 wisdom, which is literally the minimum that you can have for wisdom. I'm not sure what I'm actually going to do with this hat. If I play one of these hats, it's going to be the perfect maged one. It's kind of the same thing for my third Ganymede. It does have perfect vitality and almost perfect power. The dodge is a little bit better as well. And so after the update, we get perfect vitality, 118 power, minimum wisdom, and still the same dodge below the minimum. But at least we get 2% resistance in every element. Next up, for unmaged items, I didn't touch my Misery's Flail-Scale because it had pretty good stats. I was kind of scared of remaging the whole thing when I didn't have much time before the maintenance, so I just left it there. I already had 99 power, so that's pretty good. The vitality is not awful. I have max crit damage and max crit rate. And if you look at what changes, we only get 1 new line for strength resistance, which is based on crit damage, which I already have maxed at 10, so I was pretty confident I'd get that maxed. Apart from that, nothing changes on the item. So let's see what it has become on 2.72. So yeah, the item is exactly the same, except I get 10% earth res for free. And I'm pretty satisfied with this, to be honest. In general, I don't care too much about AP and MP parry, and the power is looking good, as well as the crit damage and crit percent. We now get to Crocobur. So my Crocobur had a 12 power trance rune applied, which means I couldn't mage it anymore. What changed with Crocobur is now the vitality went up to 500. And they added 50 intelligence, which is based on chance. So looking quickly, my chance is at 67, which is not bad. I should have a good value of intelligence after the update. Apart from this, the vitality is not great. It's probably going to go up, but not by much. And what's cool is that I can mage this item again after, so I can fix the damages if I want to, and also the vitality. So the item on 2.72 now gives 487 vitality. The stats are the same. I get 49 intelligence out of 50, which is great. And actually, I had 14 water damage and 11 neutral damage, which was under the minimum. And now that has been increased to 16, which is really great. I literally got a free buff for my item, and now I can mage it again. So this is really awesome. Another thing to note here is that my weapon hits neutral, and I couldn't change that because I couldn't mage my item anymore because of the trance rune. But now I can do that if I want to, so I'm really satisfied with Crocobur. Let's look at Fallanster now. So I had 2 Fallansters. I already had one which had perfect stats, so I knew this one was going to remain at perfect stats. And for my other Fallanster, it had an AP exo, so I really didn't want to touch it. I knew the exo was going to remain, but in general what changes with Fallanster is that the vitality goes from 200 to 250, the pushback res is increased to 40, and that's it. For my AP exo Fallanster, the vitality is looking great at 197, so I think it's going to be increased to a really good value. The pushback res is not the best, it's only 1 above the minimum, so I really don't know what's going to happen to it, but let's see. Okay, so the AP exo Fallanster gives 247 vitality on 2.72. The pushback res is increased to 32, so it's still 1 above the minimum. The lock and the range resistance are the same. So this is looking like a great item, to be honest. Even if the pushback res is not at max, it does give an AP, so you have to sacrifice somewhere. And for the other Fallanster, it's just looking perfect. It's a perfect item, nothing to say. Let's move on to the next item. Okay, next we have Jahash. Now a lot of people are not happy with the Jahash change because we've lost a lot of spell damage, but I really don't mind because we're also losing the melee resistance Malice. So you can now play this cape in melee without sacrificing your resistances, and you can actually make use of the passive really well. So the vitality is decreased from 450 to 400, the power is actually increased from 80 to 120, and the spell damage is decreased from 10% to 4%. I couldn't mage my Jahash anymore because I put a ranged damage trance rune on it, but now after the update, my ranged damage is actually gone because it was a trance rune that was not innately on the item. I'm satisfied with this because if I'm gonna play with this cape in melee, I don't want ranged damage to be on it. so I don't mind too much. I can mage the cape again now. I have perfect power and spell damage, and I'm only missing 5 vit from the max, which is the same as before. Overall, I do lose money because I applied a trance rune on it before that was pretty expensive, but it's okay. This is applied to everyone, so I'm not the only one at loss. Let's move to the next item. Okay, Servitude belt is interesting. What changes with this belt is that we get a new strength line of 100 strength based on the chance line. We get 2 summons, which is based on the MP line. The MP line is going to go away, and the initiative and vitality stay the same. With this belt, if I wanted to change something, it was just going to be the chance. But because, again, I didn't have a lot of time to mage this, and the initiative, vitality, lock, and range resistance were looking good, and I also already had the MP landed on it, so I didn't touch the belt. I kind of knew what I was going to get in 2.72. Probably just 92 chance, 92 strength. I'm going to get the 2 summons because I have an MP, and then all the other stats are going to remain the same. So let's check if that's true. Yep, that's right. 92 strength, 92 chance, 2 summons, and the rest of the stats is the same as before. It's not ideal, but it works, it gets the job done. This belt is now harder to mage because we're losing the MP, which is a great source for sync. We're essentially losing 30 sync from the MP becoming summons. But what's cool about the belt now is that it doesn't reduce your weapon damage, it doesn't reduce your range. You can play it with 12 AP now, so there's a lot of new possibilities for this belt. Kick-Tass boots. For these boots, the vitality is nerfed from 400 to 350. The pushback damage stays the same. The dodge is gone. The MP reduction is also the same. And there's 2 new lines. We get 40 power, which is based on vitality, and we get 2% resistance, which is based on dodge. Now my boots already had an overmage of vitality, so I had 67 vitality more than 400. I had perfect pushback, perfect dodge, I had the MP, and I completely ignored the MP reduction because I used these boots in a full pushback set. I didn't touch these boots because the power and the resistances will come from vitality and dodge, and I have these at perfect stats for this item, and my pushback damage is also perfect. The overmage I think will be gone because the vitality line changes from 400 to 350, so I might just get 350 vitality. So on 2.72, let's look at the boots. I was right, so the overmage is gone. I have 350 vit, 40 power, 40 pushback, 2% res everywhere, an MP, and I have 0 MP reduction like before. So this is a very good item. It's a bit sad that I lost the overmage, but it is what it is. I can still use the boots like this, and these boots probably also work for another set that does damage in every element rather than just pushback. So I might have a use for the 40 power. So the last item I did not touch is the 1000 League boots. And the reason for that is because I had pretty good stats everywhere except the MP parry, which I don't really care too much about, and it's not useful for the new lines that are being added. So comparing before and after, the item gains 100 initiative, the vitality is nerfed from 350 to 300, the power is actually buffed from 40 to 80, the MP parry stays the same, and the MP also stays the same. We got 2 new lines, 10% air res and 20 dodge. The air res is based on having the MP, and the dodge is based on the value of the power. So looking after the update, I have 597 initiative, 299 vitality, 80 power, 20 dodge, 17 MP parry like before, 10% air res, and an MP. The item is looking very good. It's like almost perfectly maged. Nothing to complain about. So that's it for this video. I hope that was entertaining. I think it's fun to look at before and after of what happened to items. Leave a like, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you guys in the world of 12.